Hey everyone, today we're going to take a look at the Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition book, Player's Handbook Races, Tieflings. We'll look at every page together and I'll give my thoughts along the way, and I'd love to hear what your thoughts are down in the comments. If you'd like to get a copy of this book for yourself, I'll put some links down in the description where you can get it. This book was released on June 15th of 2010. That's about 2 years after 4th edition was launched. It was the second in what was presumed to be a series of books covering the different 4th edition races. The first book on Dragonborn was released a few months earlier, and I'll cover that one in a different video. Sadly, as with a lot of things in 4th edition, we got a taste of what these books could offer, but this was the last one that we ever saw. The book is 32 pages long with some awesome high-power artwork on the cover by Steve Prescott, who is well known for his work on Magic the Gathering. The title page has an introduction by author Matthew Sernett, who talks about what it means to be a Tiefling and how they're the anti-hero that is constantly fighting some inner demons. This book is all about digging into what those inner demons might be. He also mentions a key point about this book. These books are about lore and backgrounds and creating well-rounded characters with amazing backstories. They were not about mechanics. This book does have an updated Infernal Pact power and a few other mechanical offerings, but it's mostly about the backgrounds and helping you play a Tiefling. What's great about this is it means that it's not specific to 4th edition. This book can help you no matter what version of Dungeons & Dragons you're playing. If you want to build an awesome Tiefling, then this book can help you do it. If you enjoy these videos, please be sure to click that like button and make sure that you subscribe to the channel. Let's take a look inside. The first section of the book is called Tieflings, and this is basically a short story that presents a Tiefling in sort of a D&D encounter type scenario. The Tiefling has allowed themselves to be captured in order to be interrogated. They could try to gain some information. Then the rest of the party comes along, and there's a battle that ensues, and there's a little piece of artwork that shows that battle in progress. It really gives you the flavor of what a Tiefling is and kind of shows you how they operate. Tieflings are characters that are willing to take chances in order to achieve the goals. I think it is an interesting approach to getting this book started because it allows the player to actually see the character in action to help them decide if this is the type of character that they would like to play. Next, we get into the history of evil, and this provides all of the background of how Tieflings came into being. They actually came from humans. There was a human kingdom called Baal Turret that had grown quite large and was actually under a lot of pressure to try to survive. As a result, the nobles from this kingdom made a pact with the devils. They performed a month-long ritual called the Bloodfire Moon, and at the end of that ritual, each of these houses formed a pact with a different fiend. Each of these pacts had a different name, such as the Iron Crown of Madness, the Scarlet Claw of Hunger, the Night's Loving Void, and several others. Everyone in these noble houses became Tieflings with great powers, but they and their offspring would forever be scarred. As a result of becoming Tieflings, they began to thirst for victory and they began to try to expand their kingdom. An equally large kingdom at the time was the Arcosta kingdom of dragons and dragonborn. Eventually, these two kingdoms fought each other in what became known as the War of Ruin. Both empires ended up getting destroyed and the Tieflings got scattered all over the place. There's some more smaller societies of Tieflings that formed around the world, but in a lot of cases, Tieflings are just wandering by themselves or in much smaller groups. Most Tieflings don't even know which house that they were a part of. Everything has become so jumbled up over the years that you don't really know where you began. There's a sidebar on this page that talks about how Tieflings don't really do much with deities unless they have something that they need from that deity. We'll learn a little bit later that Tieflings have trust issues, and naturally with deities, you're talking about faith, which involves trust, and so they don't really go hand in hand. The next section I think is really interesting. It talks about the ignoble nobility. As I mentioned before, all Tieflings are descendants of nobles because it was only the noble houses that actually participated in the Bloodfire Moon Pact. So everyone that is a Tiefling descends from some sort of noble lineage. Some of them will try to seek out who they are and what their lineage is, but are most likely going to fail in that endeavor because the information is so lost to history. Other Tieflings just simply don't care and they just are content to live their lives as they exist now. Most of the houses were lost in the War of Ruin. A few of them live on as legend, and it mentions a few of them here that you could connect your Tiefling to. So there's Akraziel, who was a general that destroyed the Arcostan citadel of Razor Tier, and it was considered at this moment that the Empire began to die. Kalir is a house with vampires who have powers of stealth. Dragu is sort of a Romeo and Juliet story of love between warring families. Conabor is essentially merged with Dragu and is not really thought of very highly. Xanafer has this history of suspicion and murder, and that lives on to today because there are Tieflings that will always wear something of red, such as a red carnation, and this indicates their association with the House of Xanafer, and other Tieflings that see this will also be suspicious of them. And then finally, Zulfura is the elemental house. There is a family member in this house who had a skin of ice that protected him from danger, while his sister was guarded by blue and white flames. And people that are descendants of this house would have a talent for elemental energy. So these are some really deep backstories that you could use for your Tiefling character if you're trying to establish a certain vibe for that character. There is a sidebar in this section talking about the Infernal Wrath power and how it has changed from what's in the player's handbook. So going forward, you should be using the stat block that's provided here as opposed to the one that's in the core rules. Next, it talks about the noble backgrounds. So while 5th edition brought backgrounds into the core rules, the seeds for this were actually planted in 4th edition. There are several backgrounds here to choose from. You get to choose benefits depending on what background you choose, including some special skills that you can decide to be trained in. Each background is more suited for a different class. So if you choose the Fire in Your Veins background, then you might be best suited to play a Warlock, though most Tieflings will do well to play a Warlock. House of Lies is more suited to Rogues, and some of the other ones align differently to other classes. All of them have some shadowy stuff in them where there's some dark history that you could use to build out your character. There's a couple sidebars in this section. The first one is building your own house. So these are just a few examples of what you could use, but nothing says you have to stick with these. If you have some ideas that you want to use to build your own house, you can certainly do that. If you want to combine some of the ideas from the ones in these examples to create something unique, that's fine too. The key is to clear it with your DM and agree on what the special abilities might be. The other sidebar talks about names and how Tiefling names generally are a combination of names you might find in Common or in Infernal. It merges the two languages together. So there's some examples of different types of names, including some house names, as well as some other things. And then we get to the largest section of the book. The next several chapters talk about how you might play a Tiefling depending on what kind of power source your character is going to use. The first section talks about Arcane Powers. So if you're wanting to play a Tiefling Wizard or maybe a Sword Mage, then these are some of the options that you could use. There's a background that indicates that you might be a Rogue Scholar who is curious about things and learns magic through patience and practice and your own drive to determine how things work. The Prophesized Master is where you are the chosen one, but you've got different groups that are trying to get you to do their bidding for them. There's also a Paragon Path provided as an additional option beyond what is in the core rules. Next, it talks about divine power. As we mentioned earlier, Tieflings don't usually align with deities, but there's nothing that says you can't be the exception and choose to align with a deity and live your life in accordance with that sort of upbringing. Tieflings can be great paladins, and given the right backstory, they could even play a cleric as well. There are several options provided here, such as the Temple Foundling, where you were essentially abandoned at birth and discovered by a wandering priest who brought you up. Another one is Rejected Inheritance, where you were part of an authoritarian household and you didn't really agree with what they were doing, so you broke away and now you fight for the freedom of others. There is a sidebar here that talks about that trust that I was mentioning. Trust does not come easy to Tieflings. They don't trust regular people, they don't trust other Tieflings, but when that trust is established, Tieflings will fight to the death to protect those in their circle. Next, we get to the martial classes that draw on the Tiefling's anger and their solitude. You might have grown up as part of a gang on the streets fighting for survival. You may have been a hired blade that performs questionable deeds for others without asking a lot of questions about why. There's even an interesting one where you might have been part of a circus act where you learned agility and stealth and you put those to practice in order to earn some side money. The Paragon Path here leans into the fact that a martial Tiefling would be the ultimate deadly weapon. Primal classes like barbarians have powers that align well with the Tiefling racial bonuses. Backgrounds for this one are more basic, such as being raised by animals in the wild or becoming a champion of the forest. The Paragon Path here talks about being one that is fighting against oppression. And finally, Psionic Power falls right in line with Tieflings and their history of forming pacts with unknown forces. There's an option where you might have been sent to a psionic academy but were mistreated, so you ran away and now you hone your power on your own. Or maybe you found some ruins that kept drawing you back in as you explored them, and you eventually found a magical crystal that connected you with some power source. The sidebar here is kind of a plug for D&D Insider because it mentions Assassin as another option, but it's only available through D&D Insider. And the Paragon Path for the Psionic Power chapter deals with leaning into the psychic abilities and making the Tiefling kind of a seer. Next, we get into the feats. There are additional feats for every tier of the game: Heroic, Paragon, and Epic. I couldn't find any feats that had prerequisites that required you to use backgrounds from this book in particular. The sidebar here is interesting because it provides some phrases that you could use as you're playing your Tiefling to give it a little bit of flavor. The next chapter is probably the most mechanical chapter of the book. It provides a bunch of items that are available for Tieflings at many different levels. This section is good for dungeon masters because you could use these as rewards at the end of a quest if you have a Tiefling in the party, or you might decide that one of these items is something that is a side quest in itself and you send them on a dungeon crawl where they have to try to find the item. And the last section of the book talks about quests. This is probably the most DM focused section of the book. If you're a dungeon master and you have a Tiefling in the party, then these are some good quests that you could insert into your campaign. There are a couple of them provided for each tier. As a Tiefling character, you might make these part of your goals and make decisions based on your desire to complete these tasks. There's even an epic destiny for a Tiefling character as they complete a full character arc. And then on the back cover, we had the artwork by William O'Connor that was originally used in the Races and Classes preview book prior to 4th edition hitting the shelves. What strikes me about this book is how it really lives into what Dungeons & Dragons is all about. D&D has its roots in creating interesting characters that could be played in between the war games. And that's really what this book covers. It's not filled with a bunch of combat mechanics. It's all about lore. It's about creating characters that have a rich history and a clear purpose. It is a splat book in its purest form, just like were common in the early editions of D&D. And I really like the variety of options available. Whatever class you want to play, it gives you guidance on how to do it. We can sometimes get trapped into thinking that because a Tiefling gets these bonuses to their character, they're limited to playing these classes. But this book provides you ways that you could use a Tiefling to pretty much play any class available in Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition. Personally, I would like to see more mechanics. I wish there were some powers provided with some of the backgrounds that would have added a little something extra, but I completely understand that that's kind of out of the scope for what they intended with this book. The bottom line is that if you like Tieflings and you want to build one with a robust backstory, then this book is going to be what you need. It has everything that you would need to put together a really complete backstory for your Tiefling character. And despite me liking mechanics, I think the fact that it lacks mechanics is one of the best things about the book, because that means that it is great for any edition of Dungeons & Dragons. Whether you're playing 1st edition, 2nd edition, 3rd edition, 4th edition, 5th edition, or the new 2024 edition, this book will help you create a nice Tiefling character. So I think that's wonderful. But let me know your thoughts in the comments. Have you used this book? Did I miss anything that you wish I had covered in more detail? Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and if you want to support me in other ways, check out some of the links down in the description. Until next time, take care.